Good morning, guys and girls. How's it going? Screezilla here, and I hope you're all well. And you join me in the Panzer J, the Os J. Now, the Panzer 4J, sorry, is the pretty much the last production model of the Panzer 4. And it's a bit of an oddity, really. Now, the Panzer 4 was one of the best mass production tanks of the time. It was getting a little bit long in the tooth at this stage. Flat armour was getting a little bit less useful, but it was still a very good tank. It had a very good gun on board. It was decently armoured. Wasn't the best, but it had decent armour. Had decent speed and decent chassis all in all. The Panzer J was a bit of an oddity though, because it almost went back in time a little bit. Now, I've got markers on here because it makes it a lot easier to see what's happening. Now, this is quite an interesting night battle, just because, well, you'll see in shortly. Now, the Panzer J, the Ars J, began rolling out the factory sort of, I think it was 44? 43? Relatively late in the life. No, it might have been a bit earlier, sorry, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, that's never a good thing. The big difference with the Panzer J was the fact that it was simplified. Now, instead of an electrical turret, an electric turret, it had a hand-cranked turret. This was done to make room for an extra fuel tank, giving the Panzer J an operational range of 300 kilometers, around about 180, 190 miles. Because the electric traversing turret unit was quite large and bulky, so they got that out. Now, there's a Cromwell up there. I see the gunfire. I didn't actually see that tank until it shot. Get the shot aimed, fire, a little bit high, but take out the commander. All good, he's reversing. Try and loop a shot over that hill. Brilliant, take out the gunner and the loader. That guy is absolutely screwed now. Now, he's popped smoke, I think, by the looks of it. Or somebody's popped smoke. Artie's going off. But that guy is really damaged. Just got to be careful of that hill. Really good spot. If he didn't fire, I wouldn't have seen him. This is what I like about night battles. I really wish they would implement this more in the game. The fact that you can use your optics, like your binoculars and your gun sight, to see a bit clearer is good. But in third-person view, you should have a really hard time of seeing things. Although you can change this with your settings, you can make it lighter, so it's almost night for day, you know, so you can see everything pretty well. I think they should have it so you can't do that, so it makes it really hard. I would love to see night battles like this with proper optics. You know, night vision, infrared, things like that. It would really make for some interesting battles, and would make some vehicles really, really useful, whereas others would struggle a lot. That could be a really cool feature to implement. Anyway, the Panzer J also didn't have the pistol ports, it didn't have turret visors, it removed so many items that it lost the Zimmerite coating on the vehicle as well. It no longer had Zimmerite for protection of magnetic mines. Instead of sort of spaced armour and special extra armour, they just went for small bits of sheet metal or mesh for protecting against heat rounds or shape charge rounds. It did have flame suppressors over the exhaust to stop the tank being seen at night, and this is why this tank's quite good at night. Although you still get the exhaust gas, you don't get the sparks of the exhaust coming out, although you don't really get that in ground forces anyway at the moment. It also lost a suspension sprocket as well, I'm pretty sure. It had one less runner wheel off the top of my head, so it sort of it wasn't as capable going across some of the terrain, so it did get affected quite badly. Now, I'm going to park up in this spot next to this cliff, and we're actually just going to pause it here for a second and just click to the free camera. Now, free camera, awful controls. But we're going to go across to the other side of the map quickly. And so if you're coming up over this way from the Allied side, try and get down, really can't see anything there. So I've got pretty much a perfect spot. I'm pretty much hidden in plain sight. And until you get about here, you can't really make out a tank. Also, the fact I've got half a bush on me as well helps. But with this rock, it really hides me quite well. And this game, I was basically hidden in plain sight. So let's just switch back to normal cameras now, and we'll continue. The tank was a lot cheaper to make. It was a lot easier to make. The other thing that was a bit iffy was it had the Panzer III's SSG 77 transmission. Despite it being very, very bad, it was really overloaded. Got a Churchill gun carriage there. Fire off a little bit low and hit his track there. And I'm going to get punished because he can see me now. He takes out my gunner, I think it was. Commander or my gunner. And the loader as well, so I've taken a bit of damage. Now, he's focusing on people to the other side now, so I can get back up there. Just don't have that depression, just got to get up a little bit further. He's aiming at me. Take a shot and manage to take him out before he can fire. So I get very lucky there. I was almost destroyed by that guy. But, move back to my spot. Again, if I didn't fire when I fired, he wouldn't have seen me. You know, I got a little bit trigger happy. I should have aimed my shot a little bit better then, but still managed to take him out. The Panzer IV-J as well also removed the anti-aircraft gun turret. It didn't have a separate coaxial mounting on top of the tank either. Along with removing the side plates, things like that, the Schutzen was pretty much removed for this tank. Basically, the Panzer J was a cheap and cheerful tank. Best way to put it, really. It's not to say it was a bad tank, but it was just very... it wasn't as good as some of the later models. Sorry, some of the earlier models, so to say, because they were pretty much at a point where they were panicking. Not all the Panzer Js had these removed features. Some of them did have extra features added. Some of them had Zimmerite added later on. Most of them didn't, in all honesty, but a couple of them did. There were sort of side meshes and side skirts added to them. There was lots of additional armour and modifications made in the field. There was also a field modification for a machine gun mount on top of the tank as well that was made to some of the tanks too, because in the field they needed that anti-aircraft fire. The thing about the Panzer J though is it was very easy to produce. With one Tiger and Tiger 1, you could produce, I think it was 4 or 5 of these tanks. As the Americans learned, production and numbers win over good design. The King Tigers, I think you could make 10 of these from every King Tiger. It was a ridiculous amount. And the thing is, the Tigers used so much resources as well, fuel, oil, things like that, that were not available. Many historians will argue and sort of make their point that if the Germans had continued with the Panzer IV, continued developing it, continued working on it, and basically kept along with that rather than going for the Uber tanks like the Tigers and things like that. Something just fell outside. They could have put up more of a fight, and I tend to agree with that position. I really do think that the Germans lost the war by producing these wonder weapons rather than producing a good, solid vehicle. Now, one of the interesting things about the Panzer IV, and especially with the Panzer IV H, G and J, is The turret was actually used on the Panther. Now, it was only used on the command vehicles. I think it was the RD-1 command vehicle of the Panzerkampfwagen Panther. But it had the Panzer IV turret on board with the 75mm KWK-40. It's a really weird design process to make because it's a much less armoured turret, but it did mean there was less weight for the tank. Now, as M24 comes out, he thinks he's safe. I didn't actually spot him first of all, I don't think. I just missed him, just so I went binoculars. There he is. And fired just before he gets in the cap. Taken out. I was really happy with that. He did a really good play sneaking around, but again, he didn't see me. I was just hidden in plain sight, as I say. This was a really nice spot, and yeah, I could have moved around a bit more and made a bit more impact in this game, but we had good command over B and A, so I was really just more interested in keeping C locked down, making sure nobody could get into this cap circle. More of a defensive play, especially with the damage I'd taken and lost 2 crew members. It was a bit risky going on a sort of all-out assault because I would be taken out relatively quickly. But another interesting thing about the Panzer IV was there was actually a Panzer IV made with the Panther turret. Yes, they swapped turrets, so the Panther got the Panzer IV turret and the Panzer IV got the Panther turret. Now, the Panzer IV with the Panther turret was a test vehicle. It was a test bed. They were testing it out, basically. One of the weakest spots of the Panzer IV was actually its turret. It had relatively good hull armour. I think it's about 80mm, I think they got on board the hull. 50 to 80mm on the front and lower plates. So, it's not terrible for the front. But the turret was relatively weak armour. But it was so much lighter, of course. It needed to be because the Panzer III transmission just couldn't take it anymore. It was an old transmission developed in the 1930s, in the early 1930s at that. So, it didn't really work, but it would be an interesting premium vehicle or something that's just a bit different to have to the German tech line. Considering they're looking at taking out, so we've got a Sherman over there, which is the thing that absolutely destroyed the Germans' push, really. As I say, mass production really won out over the super tanks. So there it is. Now, we fire off, we get a nice hit straight through the front. The Sherman's weaker armour taken out. Now, of course, if this was more reality, there would be about 50 other Shermans behind it, and we would get absolutely destroyed right now. But luckily, we're in the game. And there is some balance in the game, so we don't get taken out too easily. But having the D1 could be an interesting tank. Now, it was mainly a command vehicle rather than a full fighting vehicle. But it could be an interesting tank, and you could have it around about 5.3 to 5.8. It's going to lose a lot. The gun is not great at that BR, because it's basically just this gun, which isn't a terrible gun, but it's not going to be too good at that later BR. But that hull armour is going to be absolutely amazing. It would be a really interesting tank. Having the Panther turret on top of a Panzer IV, again, would be a very interesting tank to have, but being that it was a prototype, I don't see us getting it other than a premium vehicle. But it could be an interesting German premium to have. Now, as I say, ultimately the Panzer IVs lost out in the end of the war. The Panzer IV was, well, it was no match for the Russian tanks, really. The T-34s, the KVs, the ISs were just something else compared to these vehicles. The other problem that the Panzer IV had was it had a very small fuel tank. As I said before, they removed the electric turret rotation to add more fuel. Not much, but enough to give it an extra bit of oomph. The original had about 200 kilometer range, 250 kilometer range, and this really affected the Germans. One of the biggest issues when they were attacking Russia is they just didn't have enough fuel, and they didn't have the fuel on board the tank to get it on those long maneuvers, whereas the Russian tanks, basically made of fuel tanks, could do that. Also, they could run on pretty much anything as well, whereas the German tanks needed something a little bit nicer to run on. The Panzer IV is probably one of my favourite tanks of all time, though. It just looks like a tank. I know that's strange, but it just has that look of a tank. Similar to the Sherman. You know, you look at the Sherman and Panzer IV, and they just look like the tanks that you see in all the films. So that's the end of the game there. Not the most exciting end to the game, but got 3 kills and 1 assist there. Not a bad game all in all. So just looking at the Panzer IV-J. So if we look at it here, you can see the armour, the front armour, 80mm up the top here. It is a flat plate. There was some experimentation to have slightly sloped plates, things like that added. Also with the gun, they actually had a sloped gun mantlet as well. So this section here was made similar to the Panzer's turret, just that high angle slope at the front. They did lots of experiments and lots of tests with these vehicles. But as you see, it's got decent frontal armour. This section here is a big weak point, of course, but it's not terrible when you look at other vehicles. Of course, if it was sloped, it would make a big difference. The big problem, though, is that 50mm turret, and everything's going to go through that and just punish you. The crew are relatively spaced out, though, as you can see, which does help a lot. Generally, if you get penned in the turret, you'll lose a gunner or a commander, or a loader and commander, but you've always got the machine gunner and usually one of the 2 people in the turret to keep you going. The ammo racks are generally never hit. People tend to miss those. It's not uncommon from the side, but from the front you generally are pretty protected unless they go through your driver and get lucky. But all in all, the Panzer J is a pretty decent tank. It's got good manoeuvrability, things like that. I do think the G is a better tank, all in all. The G was better made. It has a better turret traverse. I don't know if it has it in game. I think the J has a better turret rotation in game, but it was an easier turret to use for the crews, because the electrical turret really made a difference. And it just made their lives a lot easier. You also get the smoke dispensers as well in the Panzer IV-G as well. It was just a better made tank. It still has the same armour. It doesn't have the spaced armour that the Js have. You also have the later Panzer J as well. The Panzer H, sorry. There's too many Panzers, it makes it difficult. The Panzer H, again, is probably the ultimate Panzer in my mind. In-game, it pretty much is the best Panzer you can get. Let's just go to customization. But all in all, it's just one of my favourite tanks to use. It's just a beast of a tank, and it looks great with the spaced armour. It just gives it that menacing look. The spaced armour doesn't really help much unless you're getting hit by heat. Because of course the heat sort of separates through there. It does help occasionally, but this tank has just got such good armour. With the extra plating as well, it really does help out. The turret again is a bit weaker, but you do have that extra plating if you do unlock it, which does help a little bit, but it just looks mean. This thing just looks absolutely mean. And the 75mm KWK-40 is an absolute beast of a weapon as well. Okay guys, I hope you've enjoyed this little video. Just something a little bit war fundery for a change. So I will be back again soon, and until next time, this is me, Screezilla, out. Bye bye.